The man at the head of the table had 3 guns pointed at him, a dead interpreter slumped against the wall, and approximately 45 seconds before the situation became unsalvageable. He didn't look scared. That was the first thing Rosie Tatum noticed when the elevator doors opened, and she walked straight into what her brain needed, 3 full seconds to process as a hostage situation. The second thing she noticed was that nobody had signed for the sandwiches. "I have a delivery for." She checked the receipt, because Rosie always checked the receipt. Harrow Capital, 42nd floor. 16 assorted sandwiches, 2 family-sized pasta salads, and a tray of brownies. The room went completely still. There were 9 men in suits and 2 women who looked like they hadn't slept in days, and every single one of them turned to stare at her. The man at the head of the table, the one with the guns pointed at him, finally moved. His eyes cut to her face, and something shifted in his expression, not fear, not annoyance, something that looked almost like calculation. "You need to leave," said the man nearest the door. He had an accent she couldn't immediately place. Eastern European, maybe. His hand moved toward the inside of his jacket. Rosie had grown up in the part of Cincinnati where you learned early to read a room. She read this one instantly. She stayed exactly where she was. "I can't leave until someone signs," she said. "Company policy says. I've had my float shorted 3 times this month because drivers waive signatures. My manager is done accepting verbal confirmations." The man with the guns on him looked at her for a long moment. He had dark eyes and the kind of jaw that looked like it had been carved out of something expensive. He was maybe 40, maybe younger. It was hard to tell with men who carried that particular weight of authority. His suit probably cost more than Rosie's car. "Miss," he said, and his voice was very calm. "This is not a good time." "It's never a good time," Rosie said. "That's the thing about lunch." One of the men across the table said something sharp and fast in a language that took Rosie a half-second to identify. Russian. Old school, formal Russian, the kind her grandmother's neighbor had spoken. The woman who'd given Rosie books and corrected her pronunciation every Tuesday afternoon for 6 years. He was saying, "Get the woman out of here before this turns into a complication we can't afford." The man at the head of the table didn't answer him. He was still watching Rosie. She set the delivery bag down on the nearest surface, which happened to be a sideboard that probably cost more than her apartment. "Someone in this room ordered food," she said. "I'm just here to make sure it arrives." Her name was Rosie Tatum, and she was 31 years old, and she had 3 college degrees that her mother didn't know about. Not because she was hiding them, exactly. More because the conversation had never come up in a way that felt natural. Her mother knew about the one from community college, accounting, which Rosie had finished at 19, and she knew Rosie had taken some classes online. But the full picture was something Rosie had never laid out in sequence because people got a certain look on their face when she did. And she was tired of the look. The degrees were accounting, linguistics, with a focus on Slavic languages, and international business law. The last one finished 18 months ago from a program she'd done entirely remotely while working full-time and caring for her father through his 2nd round of treatment. She worked for a catering company now, because the catering company was consistent. The hours worked around her freelance translation contracts, and because she genuinely didn't mind driving around the city, she found it peaceful. She liked the logic of routes. What she did not particularly enjoy was being in a room where someone had died very recently. The man against the wall wasn't moving. She'd registered that in the first second, and her brain had flagged it and filed it under deal with this later because there wasn't anything she could do for him right now, and the more immediate concern was the 3 men who had not yet put their weapons away. "Tell me what they're saying," the man at the head of the table said quietly. He wasn't looking at the men across from him. He was looking at her. Rosie looked at the men across the table. One of them was speaking again, low and rapid. The second man had his phone out and was typing. The third was watching the first 2 and hadn't said anything yet. which in Rosie's experience meant he was either the most dangerous one or the least relevant one, and she didn't yet know which. "The one on the left is saying your translator was the only leverage they had over you," she said, in a normal conversational tone, as though this were a perfectly ordinary request. "He's suggesting they have no reason to negotiate further and several reasons to simplify the situation." A pause. "Simplify," the man repeated. His word. The man was quiet for a moment. Then, "What is your name, Rosie?" "Rosie." He said it like he was filing it away somewhere. "I'm going to need you to stay in this room for a few minutes." "I figured," she said. His name was Declan Harrow, and he'd built his company from a single commercial property in Baltimore into a real estate and private equity firm that operated across 11 countries. And the reason there were guns in his conference room was a business dispute that had been escalating for 8 months and had now apparently reached its terminal stage. He'd known about the meeting for weeks. He'd prepared for the meeting. What he had not prepared for was Mikhail Sorin, his translator and the closest thing he had to a genuine confidant in professional settings, collapsing 40 minutes before the other party arrived. The paramedics said it was cardiac, sudden and catastrophic. Declan knew Mikhail had been careful about what he ate and drank around strangers. He had not yet said this to anyone. The meeting had started anyway, because cancelling would have shown weakness, and Declan had been showing nothing but strength for the last 8 months, and he wasn't about to change strategies now. He had enough Russian to understand the general shape of what was being said across the table, not enough to respond in any way that would hold. And then the elevator had opened. He watched her now, this woman in a red polo shirt with a company logo on the breast pocket, her dark hair pulled up under a cap, a pair of reading glasses pushed up on her forehead that she'd apparently forgotten about. And he thought, this is either the strangest luck I've ever had, or it isn't luck at all. "Tell me exactly what they said," he said, low enough that it was only for her. "Everything. Don't summarize." Rosie tilted her head slightly. She was listening to the conversation across the table with the particular quality of attention that he recognized from Mikhail. That sense of someone tracking multiple streams at once. "Volkov," she nodded toward the man on the left, "is telling the one in the gray that the timeline needs to move up. He's saying they didn't come here for a contract renegotiation. He's saying they came here for a resolution." She paused. "He used a specific term. It means resolution, but in context it means something more final than a handshake, and the man in gray, he hasn't agreed yet. He's the one with the authority in that group. Volkov is the one doing the talking, but he's watching the one in gray for the signal." She paused again. "The third man hasn't spoken because he's there to follow instructions, not give them. The phone he's holding has a camera application open." Declan absorbed this. "What would you say to them," he said carefully, "if you were going to buy us 20 minutes? Rosie looked at him. Her eyes were dark brown and very steady, and she had the expression of someone who'd already done the math and was just waiting for him to catch up. "I'd remind Volkov that whatever resolution he's considering becomes significantly more complicated when there's a witness," she said. "And then I'd speak directly to the man in gray in the formal register, and I'd propose a 30-day extension on the Kharkov terms with a 5% adjustment to the secondary clause." She paused. "Assuming that's what the original dispute is about." The reference to Kharkov came up twice in the first 3 minutes. Declan was quiet for a long moment. "You understood all of that." "I delivered sandwiches," Rosie said. "I didn't say I was only good at that." She spoke. She stood at the side of the room with her hands loose at her sides, and she spoke to the 3 men across the table in formal Russian that made the eldest one, the man in gray, whose name was apparently Sobolev. "Sit up a little straighter." Rosie had learned early that people responded to being addressed correctly, not just in their language, but in the right register of their language. Sobolev was old enough to have been educated in a specific tradition, and she used the forms of address that tradition expected, and she watched something in his posture recalibrate. She told him that Mr. Harrow understood the frustration with the timeline. She told him that the loss of the interpreter was a genuine complication that no one had anticipated, and that proceeding without full and accurate communication would not serve either party's interests. She told him that Mr. Harrow was prepared to offer a modified property terms, pending a 30-day review, and that the secondary clause could be revisited with the involvement of independent counsel from both sides. Volkov interrupted twice. The first time she let him finish, the second time she didn't. Sobolev looked at her for a long time after she stopped speaking. Then he said something, short and quiet. "He wants to know," Rosie told Declan, without looking away from Sobolev, "who you are. Tell him I'm the person Mr. Harrow brought specifically for this meeting," she said, and then she paused and said it again, directly to Sobolev in Russian, with a slight adjustment that she didn't bother translating because the adjustment was about formality and implied rank and was the kind of thing that didn't survive translation into a side comment. Sobolev nodded slowly. He said something to Volkov. Volkov didn't look happy about it, but he sat back. The guns were still out. "Tell them," Declan said quietly, "that I'd like to offer everyone in this room a very good sandwich, and that I'd like to have 20 minutes to make a phone call before we continue." Rosie translated this. Sobolev, for the first time, almost smiled. The 20 minutes became 2 hours. Declan made his phone call. His legal team arrived at the 45-minute mark, which meant they'd been on their way before he'd called, which told Rosie something about how prepared he actually was for this meeting to go sideways. A doctor arrived for the man against the wall. The guns disappeared sometime around the 1-hour mark, which Rosie noted the way she noted most things. Quietly, without comment, filing it away. She stayed because Sobolev had asked for her specifically. He'd said it to Declan in the slightly formal English he apparently did have access to. "I would prefer the woman remain," and Declan had said yes without looking at Rosie to check if that was all right, and Rosie had decided that was something she'd address later, and she stayed. She sat at the corner of the table and translated for 3 hours and ate 2 of the sandwiches and drank 4 cups of the very good coffee that appeared at some point, and she watched Declan Harrow negotiate. He was good at it. She'd expected competent, and she got something more than that. He had a way of listening that was almost physical, a stillness that made the other person feel like the only thing in the room. He never interrupted unless it served a specific purpose, and when he did interrupt it was surgical, a single sentence that redirected without appearing to redirect. Sobolev noticed it too. She could see him noticing. When the 2 parties finally stood and shook hands, the agreement wasn't complete, but the framework was in place, and more importantly, the temperature in the room had dropped from 40 below to something survivable. Sobolev shook her hand before he left. He said something. "He says you negotiate like someone who's been doing it for a long time," Declan said from behind her. She hadn't realized he'd gotten close enough to hear. He said that in English. "Yes." "Then you didn't need me to translate it." "No," Declan agreed. "I didn't." Most of his staff had cleared out. The legal team was packing up. The sideboard where she'd set down the catering bags was a wreck of coffee cups and notepads, and someone had eaten most of the brownies. Rosie started gathering the empty trays because it was her job and she was still on the clock. "What are you doing?" Declan said. "Cleaning up. Stop. I still need a signature," she said. "For the delivery." He looked at her for a moment. Then he took her order slip, glanced at the total. $640, which made his expression do something complicated, and signed it. "The company account covers catering," he said, "but I'd like to discuss a different arrangement." Rosie folded the slip and put it in her pocket. "What kind of arrangement?" "One that involves a different title than delivery driver." She looked around the room. The skyline outside the floor-to-ceiling windows was going orange and pink with evening. The city looked clean from up here, which she knew was an illusion, but it was a nice one. "I have a job," she said. "You have several skills that are being used for one of them." That was fair. She didn't say so. "You have a law degree," he said. It wasn't a question. She looked at him. You ran a background check in the last 2 hours. I had someone check credentials. Yes, I wasn't going to leave a stranger in a room with active legal negotiations without knowing who I was. Yes, Rosie looked at the window again. The thing about men like Declan Harrow was that they were always reasonable about the things that served them. The background check had served him, so it was reasonable. Whether it had served her was a different question that he hadn't asked. You could have told me you were running it, she said. A pause. You're right, he said. I should have. She hadn't expected that. She'd expected the justification to continue. I have Russian and Polish and enough legal Mandarin to work a contract, she said. I don't have a bar license in New York. That can be addressed. It takes time to address. Then we start with the translation work, he said. I have 3 ongoing international negotiations that stalled because Mikhail was the only person in the firm with the right combination of language and legal background. He paused. I'm aware this is an unusual conversation to be having at 7 in the evening with someone I met 4 hours ago. You're aware of that, Rosie said. I am, and you're having it anyway. The situation is unusual, he said. I tend to respond to actual situations rather than the ones I planned for. Rosie thought about her apartment, which was fine. She thought about her route, which was efficient. She thought about her freelance contracts, which paid adequately and fit around everything else, and asked nothing of her that she wasn't willing to give. She thought about Sobolev's face when she'd addressed him in the right register, and the way the room had changed. I want it in writing, she said. Scope of work, rate, duration, and a clause about decisions that affect me being communicated to me directly. Something moved through his expression. She didn't quite have a name for it. That's a reasonable request, he said. I know it is, Rosie said. I have a law degree. The contract was on her email by 9 the next morning. She read it 3 times, made 7 notes, and sent back a marked-up version with her comments. He called her instead of emailing back. You caught the indemnification problem, he said without preamble. Your legal team should have caught it before it got to me. They drafted it at midnight. You're not wrong. A pause. Do you have other notes, or is that the main issue? 6 other notes. I can walk you through them, please. She walked him through them. He asked 2 questions, both good ones. They settled 4 of the 6 points in the call, and he said he'd get back to her on the other 2 by end of day, and he did. She signed the revised contract on a Thursday afternoon, sitting in her car outside the catering company's dispatch office, and she sat there for a moment after she sent it back and looked at the building where she'd worked for 2 years and thought about the particular quality of a thing that has reached its end. She went inside and gave 2 weeks' notice. Her manager, a tired man named Phil who she genuinely liked, said he was sorry to lose her and asked if there was anything he could have done differently. She told him honestly that there wasn't, and she meant it. The job had been what she'd needed it to be. That wasn't a complaint about the job. The first negotiation she worked for Declan was in Warsaw. She'd been there once before, years ago with her father before he got sick, and the city had stayed with her in the way certain places do, not the landmarks but the feel of the light in the afternoon, the way conversations carried in the old town square. The second negotiation was in Seoul, where she did not speak Korean but had 3 days to prepare, and spent most of them on the phone with a contact from her linguistics program, who walked her through the specific formal registers used in that industry. She wasn't fluent by the time she got to the table. She was enough. Declan noticed. He always noticed, which was something she was still getting used to, being in rooms with someone who paid the kind of attention he paid. You studied for 3 days, he said in the car after. It wasn't a question. 2.5? And you got the term of art right. The one about the secondary clause. Junbyum told me it was important. Who's Junbyum, a friend from my linguistics program? He's at a firm in Chicago now. She paused. I have people in most of the major languages, people I can call. Declan was quiet for a moment. Outside the car window, Seoul was doing what Seoul did at night, which was everything all at once, lit up and in motion. "That's a resource most firms pay a significant amount to develop," he said. "I just kept in touch with people I liked." He looked at her. There was something in the way he looked at her that she'd been deliberately not examining too closely, because she was not the kind of person who made assumptions, and she didn't intend to start now. "Rosie," he said, I want to ask you something, and I want you to tell me honestly, if it's inappropriate." She turned to look at him. This was the thing about him that she had not expected and still hadn't fully adjusted to. He was direct in the way that people who'd learned the hard cost of indirection are direct, not blunt, not careless, just very clear about what he was actually saying. "Ask," she said. "Have dinner with me," he said. "Not a work dinner, an actual dinner." She looked at him for a long moment. "You ran a background check on me," she said, "before I knew you. I would not do that now. Why not now? Because now I'd just ask you." She thought about that. It was, she had to admit, a reasonable distinction. "I'd need you to understand something first," she said. "All right, I'm not available to be managed," she said. "I know that's not what you're proposing. I just want to say it out loud so we both know it's been said." "I'm aware," he said. "You sent me a 7-point markup on a contract I had drafted by lawyers. 8 points. You're forgetting the indemnification clause. 8 points, he agreed. "I am not under any illusion about what kind of person you are, Rosie." "Good," she said. She looked out the window at the city. All that light, all that motion. "Dinner," she said. "Sure. Later. Not that night, but later, several months into something that had no neat category but had become the central fact of her daily life." Declan would tell her that the moment he'd known, the actual moment, was not Warsaw or Seoul or any of the negotiations. It was the delivery receipt. It was the fact that in a room with 3 guns and a man who'd died and 9 people who were all operating in pure survival mode, she'd said, "I can't leave until someone signs," and she'd meant it. And she'd held her ground, and she'd been right to. She'd tell him that she'd known somewhere in that same hour, too, not about him specifically, but about the shape of her own life, the way she'd been constructing it so carefully for so long, making sure everything fit, making sure she had a place for every piece, and the degree to which she'd never actually asked herself what she was building it for. She'd figured that out in the elevator on the way back down, 42 floors, with an empty catering bag and a signed receipt and the particular feeling of something having just changed permanently. She'd thought, well, that happened. And then the elevator had reached the lobby, and the doors had opened, and Rosie Tatum had walked back out into the city, because there was still half a shift left, and she had 3 more deliveries to make, and whatever had just happened to her life would have to wait until she was off the clock. It always did. That was the thing about her. She always finished what she started.